At the engagement banquet, my fiancé tore up the marriage contract in front of everyone. Since childhood, I've never loved you. While the whole city laughed at my humiliation, my nemesis Vincent came to propose. Gritting my teeth, I agreed, only to hear his drunken thoughts that very night. Her hands are so soft, just like when she saved me at 10 years old. When will this fool finally recognize me? My engagement banquet became the laughingstock of the entire city. Evan, my childhood sweetheart and fiancé of 16 years, stood beneath the meticulously arranged floral arch, facing a room full of guests. He looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen before, then publicly tore our marriage contract to pieces. The scraps of paper fluttered down like pale butterflies. His voice was cruelly clear. Avery, I've never loved you, not since we were children. This engagement? Just a wishful joke by our elders. Standing beneath the crystal chandelier in my haute couture gown, I felt the light turn into icicles, piercing me relentlessly. A deafening buzzing filled my ears. The world faded away, leaving only his mocking smile and the suppressed, voyeuristic gazes around me. The elders from both families looked grim, and my mother was on the verge of fainting. 16 years. From the moment I could remember, I knew I would marry Evan. He followed me around clumsily unwrapping candies for me, he took the blame for my mischief, and he sneaked over the wall to see me when I was sick. Were all those tender moments I thought we shared nothing but one-sided jokes? My heart felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain so intense I could barely breathe, and humiliation washed over me like a tidal wave. I dug my nails into my palms, using every ounce of strength to maintain my last shred of dignity and keep the tears from falling. I couldn't cry, not now, not in front of these people. Just as the entire hall fell into deathly silence, with all eyes, filled with sympathy, pity, or schadenfreude, fixed on me, waiting to see how I would handle the situation, the heavy doors of the banquet hall were abruptly flung open with a loud bang. A tall, straight-backed figure strode in against the light, his steps lazy yet exuding an undeniable aura. It was Vincent. The only son of the Sterling family, my lifelong rival. We'd fought over business, bickered endlessly, and exposed each other's secrets since childhood, each eager to trample the other into the dirt. His appearance here could only mean one thing: he'd come to revel in my humiliation, and to twist the knife while he was at it. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, no tie, with the top 2 buttons of his shirt casually undone. In his hand, he carelessly dangled an exquisite jade pendant, carved with intertwined dragons and phoenixes, suspended by a red string, its water-like clarity unmistakable. That was the Sterling family heirloom, a jade pendant symbolizing the identity of the family heir and the token for the future matriarch. Everyone in the city knew of it. His gaze swept across the room, briefly pausing on Evan's livid expression before finally settling on me. The corners of his lips curled into that familiar smirk, equal parts roguish and provocative. Well, isn't this lively? His voice, slightly rough from sleep, carried clearly through the banquet hall. So, Miss Avery, back on the market? He walked toward me step by step, the crowd parting automatically to make way for him. He stopped before me, slightly leaning in, those peach blossom eyes gazing at me from close range, their emotions unreadable. Then, under the astonished gazes of everyone present, he casually waved the priceless jade pendant in his hand, his tone as nonchalant as if he were discussing the weather. Since no one wants it anymore, I'll take it. Avery, my family's heirloom jade pendant, trade it for the rest of your life. Will you marry me? The entire room erupted in uproar. I jerked my head up, crashing into the depths of his unfathomable gaze. Humiliation, anger, mortification, and a hint of reckless defiance born of desperation surged wildly in my chest. Evan publicly calls off the wedding, and Vincent proposes on the spot? What is this? An even bigger joke? I know Vincent hates me, just as much as I hate him. By doing this, he simply wants to trample the dignity of me and the Thornhill family once more, using this extreme method to declare his victory. I stared at him, my teeth nearly drawing blood from my lower lip. My nails dug deep into my palms, pain keeps me somewhat clear-headed. Accepting him would instantly make me the city's biggest topic of gossip, confirming the ugly truth that Avery can't live without a man. Not agree? The torn pieces of our marriage certificate still lay scattered on the floor, Evan's doing. My current isolation and humiliation were already undeniable facts. In that split second, a mad idea flashed through my mind. Rather than staying here to endure Evan's pitying gaze, and everyone else's, why not throw myself into another obvious pit of fire? At the very least, that bastard Vincent was giving me a chance to strike back right here, right now. At least I could wipe that fake, tender look off Evan's face. I took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in my throat and steadying my trembling. I forced my voice to sound calm, even deliberately nonchalant, sure. I reached out and snatched the pendant hanging midair from him. The icy touch instantly seeped into my skin. Vincent, remember what you said today. I clenched the pendant tightly, as though clutching the last lifeline, even if that lifeline might be laced with venomous thorns. Vincent seemed to pause for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. He reached out and pulled me naturally into his embrace, his movements both commanding and intimate. He tilted his head, his warm breath brushing past my ear, and whispered in a voice only the two of us could hear, "Of course, my fiancé." His voice carried laughter, but I inexplicably detected a hint of something else. Before I could ponder it further, he had already wrapped his arm around me and boldly led me through the stunned crowd, striding straight out of that suffocating engagement party. I moved into Vincent's villa. There was no wedding, no ceremony, just both families hastily completing the necessary formalities amid utter shock and complicated emotions. After all, a union between the Thornhill and Sterling families, even one that began in such an absurd manner, carried enough entangled interests to make everyone soberly weigh the consequences. The moment I agreed to Vincent, Evan's face twisted as if he'd swallowed a fly. He probably never dreamed his carefully orchestrated humiliation would end this way. On the first night staying at Vincent's villa, I sat on the guest room bed hugging my knees, gazing at the unfamiliar night scene outside the window, feeling nothing but cold emptiness and confusion in my heart. The impulsive decision now brought endless regret and unease. How would Vincent and I get along from now on? Continue fighting to the death? Or maintain a superficial marriage? Footsteps sounded outside the door. Vincent had returned. He seemed to have been drinking, his steps somewhat unsteady. I immediately stiffened like a hedgehog, going on full alert. He pushed open the door without turning on the lights. Using only the moonlight streaming through the window, he swayed unsteadily to my bedside before collapsing like a fallen mountain, directly crushing the blanket covering me. The heavy scent of alcohol mingled with his usual cedarwood fragrance washed over me. Get up. Vincent, get back to your own room. I pushed him hard, but he didn't budge. Instead, as if finding a comfortable position, he buried his head in the blanket near my neck and nuzzled against it. My entire body stiffened. Just as I was about to muster all my strength to kick him off, I suddenly heard a voice, no, not with my ears. The voice seemed to echo directly in my mind, slightly slurred and dazed from drunkenness, so sweet, just like before. I froze abruptly, my pupils contracting sharply. Auditory hallucination? It must be, today's been too overwhelming, and now I'm hearing things. I stiffly lowered my head, staring at the furry head buried beside me. Vincent's eyes were tightly shut, his breathing even, as if sound asleep. Yet that voice spoke again, carrying a softness tinged with grievance that I'd never heard before. Her hands are so soft, just like when she pulled me from the water when I was 10. 10 years old? Drowning? My heart gave a sudden jolt. That summer when I was 10, I did rescue a drowning boy by the pond behind my hometown's mountain. The boy was drenched all over, his face pale. When I asked who he was, he just clung tightly to my hand, refusing to let go. Later, his family hurriedly came to take him away, and I never saw him again. It was so long ago that the memory has long since grown hazy. Could it be, that boy was Vincent? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Vincent and I had been at each other's throats for so many years, he never mentioned it. And if he remembered, why has he opposed me at every turn all these years? Just as my mind was reeling in shock and turmoil, that inner voice rang out again, thick with resentment and gritted teeth. When will this idiot finally recognize me? Moron Avery, so damn stupid. All my shock and confusion were instantly replaced by a surge of inexplicable fury. Idiot? Moron? So damn stupid? Vincent, you bastard. I knew you were up to no good. A secret crush? Bullshit. Is this how someone with a secret crush behaves? Ever since we were kids, how many times has he tripped me up? How many projects has he snatched from me? Fuming, my chest heaved as I glared at his handsome face sleeping soundly beside me. I could practically feel my palm itching to slap him awake and demand an explanation. So when he proposed today, it wasn't just to humiliate me, but because he had ulterior motives? Because he remembered that childhood incident? But what kind of logic is that? Repaying a debt? Or is this his twisted way of showing affection through bullying? That night, sleep completely eluded me. Vincent beside me remained blissfully unaware, breathing steadily, occasionally nuzzling unconsciously toward me like some oversized puppy seeking warmth. His intermittent thoughts kept scrolling through my mind all night. Can I just hold her while sleeping, just for a moment? Did she cry today? That bastard Evan. She took the jade pendant, can't go back on it now. Each sentence was like a puzzle piece, trying to assemble a Vincent I never knew, one who seemed to have secretly liked me for many years. This is too horrifying, even harder for me to accept than Evan publicly calling off the wedding. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains. Vincent woke up frowning, pressing his temples. When he saw me sitting beside him with dark circles under my eyes and a complicated gaze, he clearly froze for a moment before quickly resuming that infuriatingly mocking expression. Well, fiancé, staring at me this early in the morning? Smitten already? His voice was hoarse from the hangover, but his eyes remained as sharp as ever. I stared at him intently, trying to detect even the slightest trace of those inner thoughts from last night. Nothing. Only the familiar provocation and aloofness remained. So was it really my hallucination last night? Or could I only hear them when he was unconscious? Vincent, I spoke, my voice hoarse from staying up all night. That summer when you were 10, did you ever fall into a pond? Vincent, who was just about to get out of bed, froze abruptly, his back momentarily stiffening. Though he quickly regained his composure, even turning to look at me with an even more mocking expression. What's the matter? Did you finally remember to care about your future husband's childhood experiences? He didn't admit it, but he didn't deny it either. That momentary stiffness said it all. My mind was in turmoil. So it's true. That boy really was him, and he really remembers. But why won't he admit it? Why does he still treat me like this? Just then, that familiar inner voice abruptly sounded again, with a barely noticeable trace of nervousness. Why is she suddenly asking about this? Does she remember? No, her expression isn't right. Stay calm, Vincent, don't panic. Looking at his composed and even mocking expression while hearing his panicked inner voice, I was overcome by an absurd feeling. Taking a deep breath, I decided to test him. I stood up and walked over, tilting my head back to look at him. He towered over me by more than a head, usually exuding an intimidating presence, but now I knew his inner turmoil far surpassed his calm facade. I reached out and gently straightened his crooked shirt collar. The gesture was completely out of character for our usual interactions. Vincent froze completely, his pupils contracting slightly as he instinctively leaned back, though the tips of his ears rapidly flushed a faint shade of red. His Adam's apple bobbed as he spoke in a slightly strained voice, "What are you doing?" Meanwhile, his mind was already screaming internally, "She touched me? What's going on? Did she snap from the stress? Did Evan piss her off so badly she lost her mind? But, her hand is so soft, can she touch me again?" I forced back the twitching at the corner of my mouth, withdrew my hand, and feigned calm as I said, "What's the matter? Isn't this how it should be between fiancés?" Vincent looked at me with a complicated gaze, as if scrutinizing a monster. "Avery, are you okay?" I'm fine, I replied, turning toward the bathroom. Never better. Closing the door, I stared at my exhausted yet strangely exhilarated face in the mirror, finally unable to hold back, and let out an extremely conflicted expression. Vincent has a crush on me. This realization was like a thunderbolt, blasting open a bizarre, dazzling crack in my otherwise bleak and hopeless world. The days that followed became incredibly thrilling. Vincent and I began an extremely bizarre cohabitation. On the surface, we still maintained our old dynamic of sworn enemies, like needles meeting wheat-ons. We'd fight over the last piece of bacon at the breakfast table, knives and forks clashing. We'd trade sarcastic barbs for half an hour over who used whose towel by mistake. In business meetings, we'd engage in fierce eye battles across the long conference table, neither yielding an inch. But secretly, I could clearly hear all his contradictory inner thoughts. For instance, when I accidentally spilled coffee on his expensive suit. Outwardly he was furious. Avery, are your eyes on the back of your head? This is a limited edition. But internally he was screaming, ah. She touched me on purpose. Even if it was by spilling coffee. Does this count as some kind of physical contact? This suit can never be washed. I'm framing it. Or when I worked late and fell asleep in the study. He would nudge my chair lightly with his foot while grumbling, hey, go sleep in your room if you're tired. Don't drool all over my documents. Yet his movements were incredibly gentle as he carried me to the bedroom and carefully tucked me in. Her inner monologue, those dark circles are so ugly. But he looks quite docile when asleep. That blind Evan. Like when he saw me shaking hands with a male representative from a partner company. Outwardly, he appeared completely unperturbed, even managing to exchange pleasantries politely. While internally, a volcanic eruption was underway. Why grip so tight? Trying to break his hand? That guy's sleazy smile clearly shows he's no good. How dare brainless Avery smile at him? I'm buying out his company the moment we get back. I had no choice but to gradually adapt, amidst our heated arguments, to simultaneously receiving his mental barrage of frantic justifications for me and secret compliments like even angry, you're still so beautiful. The feeling was absolutely thrilling. But it also led me to uncover a massive secret. Evan's broken engagement wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, it had been planned long in advance. Not only did he drain the funds from a major project under my responsibility, but he also secretly siphoned off many of our family's core resources, preparing to establish his own venture. He even conspired with several rival companies, aiming to completely destroy my family. As I pieced together these clues and sat trembling in the study, Vincent walked in with a glass of milk, muttering, "Don't want you dropping dead in my house, it'd be bad luck." But when he saw my pale face, he frowned. "What's wrong?" "You look like the sky's fallen," he said, his tone still sharp. Before I could speak, I heard his inner voice, who bullied her again? Evan? That bastard, I'm going to tear him apart. I looked up at his deliberately impatient face and, for the first time, didn't argue with him. Instead, I asked hoarsely, "Vincent, just hypothetically, if I wanted to take down Evan, would you help me?" Vincent clearly froze for a moment, then scoffed and slammed the milk down in front of me. "Help you? Avery, is this how you ask for favors? Help. Of course I'll help. I'll destroy him. Beg me. Quick, say dear Vincent, please, I beg you." His mind was screaming frantically. Looking at his under a yet expectant expression, I suddenly found it a bit amusing, and the icy fear in my heart dissipated somewhat. Oh, never mind then. I lowered my head and continued reviewing the documents. I can manage on my own. Why aren't you following the script? After holding back for a few seconds, he said gruffly, "Considering our families are cooperating now, it'd be troublesome if your stupidity got you killed and dragged me down. Tell me what you need." I couldn't help but let the corners of my mouth twitch upward before quickly suppressing it. "Thanks." Humph. With Vincent's overt and covert assistance, my actions against Evan went much more smoothly. Vincent used his family's connections and channels to help me obtain many crucial pieces of evidence. We even set a trap to lure Evan in, preparing to completely expose him at an upcoming industry summit. During this process, my relationship with Vincent underwent a subtle change. We still bickered, but the hostility gradually transformed. It became more like a tacit understanding, a form of flirtation. At the very least, in his increasingly unconcealed inner thoughts, I could hardly bear to look at his outwardly tsundere demeanor of "I can't stand the sight of you." The night before the industry summit, feeling a bit nervous, I stood on the balcony for some fresh air. Vincent walked over and handed me a can of beer. Nervous? He leaned against the railing, gazing at the distant nightscape. A little. I took the beer and had a sip. The night breeze brushed past, creating an unusually peaceful atmosphere. Vincent, I suddenly remembered the question that had been on my mind: if you remember everything from our childhood, why have you been opposing me all these years? Vincent turned his head to glance at me, the moonlight casting faint shadows across his face. After a moment of silence, he scoffed, "Who remembers such trivial things from so long ago? Going against you? I just couldn't stand the sight of you. If I didn't oppose you, how else could I get your attention? Because I was afraid you'd see that from the moment I pulled you ashore, you were the only one in my eyes. Because I got used to staying by your side this way." His inner voice, deep and clear, carried a trace of tenderness and helplessness that was hard to notice. My heart felt as if something had gently bumped into it, sour and astringent, yet with a strange sweetness. I turned my head to look at his sharply defined profile, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry at his words that contradicted his heart. Instead, I had an inexplicable urge to expose him. Really? I lightly shook the beer can, but I think I'm starting to remember. That little boy by the pond, scared like a drowned rat, clinging desperately to my hand and refusing to let go. Vincent suddenly turned to look at me, a flash of panic crossing his eyes before being quickly masked by forced composure. "You're remembering wrong." "She remembers? Damn it, damn it. My image is ruined." Watching his slightly reddened earlobes, I couldn't help but laugh. "Maybe." I didn't press further, just tilted my head back and finished the remaining beer. "Be careful tomorrow." Vincent stared at my smiling face, momentarily dazed, then awkwardly looked away with an unnatural expression and uttered a quiet "hmm." "She looks so beautiful when she smiles." At the industry summit. Before all the professionals and media present, I publicly revealed Evan's embezzlement and theft of trade secrets. The room erupted in shock. Evan turned deathly pale, trying to defend himself, but his words were powerless against the irrefutable evidence. His reputation was in ruins, and he was about to face legal consequences. Before security dragged him away, he glared at me with venomous hatred. "Avery, do you really think Vincent likes you? He's just using you to destroy me. To take down the Thornhill family. Just wait, your fate won't be any better than mine." I stood straight-backed, staring at him with an expressionless face. Yet my heart wasn't as calm as it appeared. After all, this was someone I'd once given my sincere feelings to. Seeing things come to this pass inevitably stirred some melancholy within me. At that moment, Vincent stepped forward, shielding me from Evan's venomous gaze. He said nothing, merely raising his hand to lightly rest on my shoulder. The gesture wasn't particularly gentle, still carrying traces of his characteristic dominance. Yet in that instant, the strength conveyed through that touch felt unshakably solid. Evan was taken away. The summit continued, but everyone's eyes seemed to linger subtly on me and Vincent. I whispered, "Thank you." Vincent scoffed, withdrawing his hand and slipping it back into his suit pocket, returning to his usual rebellious demeanor. "Don't flatter yourself." I just found him annoying. My hand's numb, her shoulders are so bony. Should have punched Evan a couple more times. Let this be a lesson to anyone who dares bully her again. Listening to his inner monologue and watching his awkward profile, I suddenly realized this stubborn, sharp-tongued rival of mine wasn't so detestable after all. In fact, he seemed kind of cute. That night, Vincent seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood and had a few extra drinks with some important clients. When he got home, he was drunk again, even more so than on the night of the engagement party. He followed me straight into my guest room, flopped onto the couch, closed his eyes, and furrowed his brows slightly as if he'd fallen asleep. Helpless, I went to get him a glass of water. Just as I turned around, I heard him murmur, this time not in his thoughts, but in reality, a drunken whisper, Avery. I froze mid-step. So stupid. I gritted my teeth, suppressing the urge to kick him off the couch. But I think I've liked you since I was 10. My heart skipped a beat violently. All the blood in my body seemed to rush to my cheeks. The room was so quiet that only his heavy breathing and my drumming heartbeat remained audible. He turned over as if sinking into deeper sleep, his subsequent words becoming indistinct. But I'd already heard them. The most genuine, most direct confession. Not through those inner thoughts I could secretly overhear, but spoken aloud by him himself. Even if it was when he wasn't fully conscious. I stood frozen in place for a long time. Looking at that man on the sofa, stripped of all his thorns and defenses, completely vulnerable, I couldn't help but recall all the chaotic, bizarre, and tumultuous moments we'd shared since we first met. A wave of unprecedented, complex, and overwhelming emotion finally broke through all my defenses and doubts. I walked over to the sofa, crouched down, and gazed closely at his sleeping face. Then I reached out, gently poking his cheek, and whispered in response with a tenderness and certainty I hadn't even realized I possessed, yeah. I think I might like you a little too. So, Vincent, you're doomed. The moonlight was serene, casting a silvery glow across the entire room. The moment the words "I think I might like you too" escaped my lips, I froze in shock myself. Moonlight seeped through the gap in the half-drawn curtains, casting a cold white streak across Vincent's sharply defined features. His breathing was steady and even, thick eyelashes casting small shadows beneath his eyelids. Those usually mocking or calculating peach blossom eyes were now peacefully closed, unexpectedly revealing a rare glimpse of innocence and harmlessness. My heart was pounding so violently it felt like it might leap out of my throat. My fingertips still tingled with the lingering warmth of his skin from when I'd touched his cheek. It burned a little. What had I just said? That I liked him? Liked Vincent? This realization made my scalp tingle, and I practically fled in panic from the guest room. The door slammed shut behind me with a bang as I leaned against the cold wood, gasping for breath. It must be the exhaustion from tonight messing with my head. Yes, that has to be it. I slapped my cheeks hard, trying to shake off the eerie palpitations and the unnatural heat on my face. Yet my mind kept uncontrollably replaying Vincent's drunken murmur, his earlier contradictory thoughts, and that hand on my shoulder, firm and unyielding, when he stepped in front of me. An unprecedented chaos. I barely slept that night. The room next door was eerily quiet. Vincent must have passed out drunk. I spent the hours teetering between how could I possibly like Vincent, and but it seems he's really liked me for years, my sanity hanging by a thread. The next morning, I stumbled out of my room sporting 2 massive dark circles under my eyes, ready to forcibly reboot myself with iced coffee. In the dining room, Vincent was already seated, dressed in a simple white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his hair still slightly damp as if he'd just showered after his morning run. He was engrossed in financial news on his tablet, a black coffee resting beside him. At the sound of my footsteps, he looked up. Our eyes met. The air froze for an instant. My chest tightened, and I instinctively held my breath. Would he remember last night? Even just a little? Vincent's gaze lingered on my face for 2 seconds, his brows furrowing almost imperceptibly before settling back into that infuriatingly lazy expression he always wore. TCH, he set down his tablet and took a sip of coffee. Did you stay up all night being a thief? Or have you finally grown a conscience and lost sleep over all those times you tripped me up? His tone, expression, and gaze were exactly as usual. That familiar mix of provocation and casual mockery. The tightly wound string in my heart inexplicably loosened by half, but what followed was a twinge of disappointment I hadn't even realized I'd been feeling. so he really didn't remember. Maybe that's for the best. I took a deep breath, forcing myself into battle mode, pulled out the chair and sat opposite him, picked up a slice of toast and spread butter on it vigorously. You're overthinking it. I was just strategizing how to take back that East City project you snatched from me before. It's perfectly normal to lose sleep over it. Vincent let out a scoff, set down his coffee cup, leaned slightly forward, and looked at me across the table with a hint of amusement in his eyes. Oh? And did you come up with anything? Trade secret, I mumbled through a mouthful of toast. Those dark circles are hideous. Did I scare her last night? That bastard Evan, his inner voice carried a hint of barely noticeable irritation and concern. My chewing slowed. See, this was exactly it. On the surface, we were at each other's throats, yet his thoughts told a completely different story. This stark contrast made every interaction with him feel like simultaneously watching a performance and reading the script. What are you staring at? Vincent seemed to notice my gaze and raised an eyebrow. You've got something on your face. I lied without batting an eye. What? He instinctively raised his hand to touch his face. A bit unsightly, I added. His mind was filled with question marks. Is she not awake yet? Or is she insulting me? I lowered my head, using my coffee to hide the uncontrollable upward curve of my lips. This feeling of being the only one who knew the truth while watching him perform alone didn't seem half bad. The mess left behind by Evan's downfall was even worse than imagined. Not only had he drained the projects under my responsibility, but he also exploited his former position in the group to expose several potential financial loopholes and regulatory violations. The company's stock price plummeted continuously, and its reputation suffered severe damage. My father seemed to age 10 years overnight, while my mother spent her days in tears. Internal morale was in turmoil, and several uncles who had long coveted the succession rights began maneuvering behind the scenes. I had to muster all my focus and throw myself into this tough battle to save the family business. Surprisingly, Vincent didn't stand idly by. In fact, he spared no effort in helping. He no longer merely provided information and channels discreetly but began openly mobilizing the resources of the Sterling family conglomerate to intervene. Capital, connections, projects, in an assertive and unquestionable manner, he deepened the intertwined interests of Thornhill Group and Sterling Group. On the surface, his reasoning was, Avery, you're my nominal fiancé now. If your family collapses, it won't do my family any good. Our stock prices will take a hit too. But I knew it wasn't just that. Because I could hear him. During those lengthy, suffocating board meetings, when those old foxes cornered me until I turned pale, he would suddenly speak up, using the most cutting yet composed tone, to dismantle their arguments point by point, redirecting the hostility toward himself. A bunch of old farts, picking on a little girl, what kind of heroes are you? Look how pale she is, can she even hold up? I'll deal with those troublemakers when we get back. Late at night in the study, when I was overwhelmed by mountains of documents, he would just happen to pass by, tossing me a box of stomach medicine or a cup of hot milk, muttering, "Don't die on my watch," and then casually point out a few fatal flaws in my proposal. This idiot woman, always pushing herself. This data is wrong, TSK, guess I'll have to step in. Hands are so cold, is the heater in the study broken? He was like a prickly guardian angel, building an invisible barrier around me in his uniquely sharp-tongued and unyielding way, deflecting most of the overt and covert attacks aimed at me. I grew accustomed to his presence. Got used to instinctively listening to his thoughts when faced with difficulties, searching for clues and comfort, though most of the time his inner voice was just calling me stupid. Became familiar with those exhausted late nights when the study door would creak open, delivering a begrudging handout laced with disdain. Our bizarre mutual understanding deepened day by day. Until that afternoon when an anonymous package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was a stack of photographs. The images showed Vincent meeting and conversing with a young, beautiful girl in various settings, with some even appearing quite intimate. The girl seemed to come from an affluent family, exuding an air of elegance. Attached was a printed note, Do you really think Vincent is helping you? He's just using you to stabilize the situation so he can smoothly take over Thornhill Group. He's already engaged to the heiress of Ravenscroft Group. My blood ran cold in an instant. Ravenscroft Group was a commercial giant even more powerful than Sterling Group and Thornhill Group. The photos were taken from cunning angles, and Vincent's smiles with the girl did look painfully sharp to the eyes. Reason told me this was likely a scheme to sow discord, orchestrated by those unwilling to accept defeat, either business rivals or members of the family. But emotionally, a cold, betraying fear quickly seized me. Evan's lesson was still vividly fresh in my mind. Trust? What a luxurious and laughable thing. I clutched those photos, my fingertips icy. That night, Vincent came back very late, carrying a faint scent of alcohol and perfume. It wasn't his usual cedarwood cologne, but a cloyingly sweet feminine fragrance. He seemed in a good mood, even humming an off-key tune for once. I sat on the living room sofa without turning on the lights, the dim blue glow from the TV screen casting over my expressionless face. "You're back?" I spoke up, my voice slightly hoarse. Vincent seemed to notice me only then, pausing for a moment before casually switching on the living room light. "Yeah. Still awake?" The light was harsh, and I squinted as I watched him take off his suit jacket and toss it carelessly onto the sofa. That jacket, too, seemed to carry that faint, elusive sweetness. "Who did you meet today? You seem so happy." I tried my best to keep my tone sounding normal. Vincent paused for a moment, walked to the liquor cabinet to pour himself a glass of water, and spoke casually with his back to me. "Nothing much, just met with a few clients. That old fox from Ravenscroft Group was really difficult to handle, but we finally reached an agreement. That girl Nova was there too, chattering nonstop, so annoying. Her perfume gave me a headache." My heart sank little by little. He really did meet with people from Ravenscroft Group, met that Nova. He wasn't telling the truth. "Really?" I stood up, walked over to him, and held out the photo I'd been clutching tightly in my hand, right in front of his face. "Vincent, care to explain?" Vincent lowered his gaze, his eyes resting on the photos, his pupils contracting slightly. The casual expression on his face vanished instantly, his brows knitting together. "Are you investigating me?" He raised his head, fixing me with a sharp stare, his tone carrying unmistakable displeasure. His first instinct was to demand an answer. Seeing the offended chill in his eyes, I felt something sting sharply in my chest. Why would I need to investigate? I curled my lips into a mocking smile. Your fairy tale romance with the Ravenscroft Group's heiress must already be the talk of the town, no? Should I congratulate you in advance for this double happiness? Not only have you gained actual control of the Thornhill Group, but you've also climbed onto the high branch of the Ravenscrofts? Vincent's face darkened completely. He snatched the photos, crumpled them into a ball, and threw them into the trash bin, his voice icy. "Avery, what the hell is going through your mind all day? A business marriage? Do you think everyone is like Evan? Then tell me, what's the meaning of these photos? And what about the perfume scent on you?" I looked up at him, my nails digging deep into my palms, struggling to keep my voice from trembling. "You said you were meeting a client, wasn't it the chairman of the Ravenscroft Group and his daughter?" Vincent stared at me with a complex gaze, anger, disappointment, and a trace of exhaustion I couldn't decipher. After a few seconds of silence, he took a deep breath, suppressing his fury as he said, "Yes, I met with the Ravenscroft Group's boss and his daughter. But this talk of a marriage alliance is nonsense. Nova and I only met a few times as kids, and today was just a coincidence." As for the perfume scent, he tugged irritably at his tie. "She accidentally spilled wine on me. She doesn't trust me. In her eyes, I'm no different from Evan. What's the point of explaining? She wouldn't believe me anyway." His inner voice carried a heavy, almost suffocating weight of resignation and self-mockery. I looked into his eyes, now filled with anger and a wounded emotion, listening to those low murmurs in his heart. The previous fury and fear of betrayal suddenly deflated like a punctured balloon, dissipating bit by bit. In its place emerged a deeper sense of bewilderment and heartache. What was I doing? Because of a few photos with ambiguous angles, because of an anonymous package of unknown origin, I so easily doubted him, denied everything he had done for me and my family during this time? Had Evan truly scarred me so deeply? Had I become so paranoid that I would even push away someone who genuinely cared for me? Avery, Vincent said coldly when I remained silent, his tone laced with a distant finality. If you can never trust me, then there's no point in continuing this charade between us. With that, he turned to leave. In that fleeting moment as he turned away, I clearly heard his last inner thought, trembling with something close to brokenness: forget it. Hearing it felt like a blunt knife slicing mercilessly through my heart. Vincent. The words burst from me almost involuntarily, and I instinctively grabbed his wrist. He paused but didn't turn back. I could feel the strong pulse of his wrist against my palm, along with the stiffness in his body. The living room was filled only with our heavy breathing and the insignificant background noise from the TV. I opened my mouth, my throat tight. The words "I'm sorry" and "I believe you" rolled on the tip of my tongue, over and over, but somehow, I couldn't voice them. All my pride, stubbornness, and the fear of getting hurt again wrapped around me like an impenetrable net. I held onto his hand, refusing to let go, yet unsure how to move forward. In the suffocating stalemate, I heard the faintest, almost imperceptible sigh from deep within him. Then, slowly, bit by bit, he withdrew his wrist from my grasp. Without giving me another glance, he walked straight to the study and closed the door. A soft thud echoed. Like an invisible barrier, it rose once again between us. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at my empty hand and that tightly shut study door, feeling nothing but icy numbness creeping through my body. This time, I'd really messed up. That study door stood like a cold boundary marker, separating Vincent and me into two different worlds. That night, I remained on the living room sofa, frozen in the posture of having my hand shaken off, for what felt like an eternity. The rowdy variety show blaring from the TV couldn't dispel the chill in my heart. My fingertips still seemed to retain the warmth of his wrist, the pulse beneath his skin, and, most painfully, the resolute force with which he'd pulled away in the end. Forget it. These words, along with that heavy sigh in his heart, played on an endless loop in my mind like a cursed mantra. Had I truly gone too far? Because of Evan's betrayal, had I become so paranoid, like a hedgehog, lashing out indiscriminately at anyone who tried to get close? Especially Vincent, someone whose words were sharp, yet who had repeatedly pulled me out of the abyss with his actions. Those photos, that anonymous package, they were full of holes. I could have calmed down, investigated more carefully, or at the very least, approached him in a gentler way. Yet I chose the most hurtful path: doubt, mockery, equating him with Evan. Curled up on the sofa, my face buried in my knees, a wave of unprecedented regret and self-loathing washed over me. The atmosphere in the villa hit rock bottom over the next few days. Vincent stopped his sarcastic remarks and rarely even spoke to me. We became like two strangers living under the same roof, deliberately avoiding each other's schedules. Even when we occasionally crossed paths in the dining room or living room, he would pass by expressionlessly, refusing to spare me even a glance. He still left early and returned late, no longer carrying unfamiliar perfumes but an inescapable air of exhaustion. The study light often remained on until the small hours of the morning. I knew the Thornhill Group crisis was far from over, he was still running around dealing with the mess. But this time, he no longer shared any updates with me, nor did he casually point out mistakes in my proposals. The fragile bond between us, woven from inner voices and silent understanding, seemed severed by my own hand. I tried to speak, wanting to say something, even a stiff thank you or I'm sorry. But every time I saw his cold, aloof profile, all words stuck in my throat. Pride and guilt waged a fierce battle within me. Until that afternoon, when I had no choice but to seek him out in his study to confirm a tricky contract detail, the first time I'd stepped into his territory since our Cold War began. The study door was slightly ajar. I knocked, but there was no response from inside. After a moment's hesitation, I gently pushed it open. Vincent wasn't there. The desk was piled high with documents, the computer screen still illuminated, with a half-finished cup of cold coffee beside it. My gaze inadvertently swept across the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. What was displayed on the screen wasn't a crisis management document for the Thornhill Group, but rather a meticulously prepared, entirely new proposal for that project in the East End, the one we had previously fought over. Beneath the title of the proposal was clearly marked, Avery Edition. I froze, instinctively taking a few steps closer. This proposal is far more polished and incisive than the one Vincent snatched from me before, the one he mocked as full of holes. Not only does it address all the oversights in my previous version, but it also incorporates many forward-thinking and aggressive strategies I'd never considered. With detailed data and airtight reasoning, it's practically tailor-made for me, guaranteeing my victory in the upcoming rebidding process. Beside this document lies an open encrypted folder. I catch glimpses of several file titles: Thornhill Group Financial Vulnerability Remediation Plan, Cleanup Strategy for Evans' Remaining Faction, Post-Crisis Media PR Guidance. Each one targets the most critical pain points Thornhill Group currently faces. My breathing grows rapid. So, his early departures and late returns these days, the light burning late into the night in his study, the lingering exhaustion between his brows, none of it was because he was distancing himself from me or scheming how to arrange a marriage alliance with the Ravenscroft Group. But because he was silently clearing away every obstacle, for me, for the Thornhill Group. Even the project I had been longing to reclaim, he. Just then, footsteps sounded outside the study. I snapped back to reality, flustered as if caught red-handed, hastily retreating from the study and gently closing the door behind me, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Leaning against the cold wall, I raised a hand to cover my eyes, an aching heat surging uncontrollably. Vincent. You hypocritical bastard. Knowing the truth and seeing Vincent's icy demeanor now feels completely different. He was no longer my enemy, but a sulky, secretly infatuated person who masked his hurt and efforts with indifference. This realization made my heart feel like it was soaking in warm water, sour and soft, with an inexplicable hint of sweetness. I began trying to break the stalemate. For example, after he pulled another all-nighter, I would prepare a pot of nourishing millet porridge in advance, leaving it in the kitchen's insulated pot with a note bearing a simple smiley face. The first time, he showed no reaction, leaving the porridge untouched. The second time, the thermal pot was empty, and the note had been tossed into the trash. The third time, as usual, I set down the porridge and note, turning to leave when I faintly heard his inner voice mutter, "Not bad." My footsteps paused, and I couldn't help but let a small smile creep onto my lips. For example, I would casually handle some problems he had secretly solved for me in places where he could see, then mutter to myself with feigned surprise, "Huh? How did this issue suddenly get resolved? It's like we've got a magical house elf helping out?" On the surface he remained aloof, pretending not to hear. But his inner monologue screamed, "Idiot. It's the house elf lord." Or take another instance, when facing that same hard-nosed board member again, I stopped confronting him head-on as before. Instead, I did it right in front of Vincent. Deliberately adopting a slightly troubled and vulnerable tone, sigh. Zachary's so difficult to communicate with. If only someone could put in a good word for me. I finished speaking and pretended to focus intently on the documents in my hands, though my ears perked up like antennas, nervously waiting. Vincent was leaning on the sofa, browsing reports on his tablet at the time. Hearing my words, he didn't even lift his eyelids, only letting out a faint, icy scoff, as if mocking my incompetence. Yet the next day, to my surprise, that most troublesome Zachary actually called me first. His tone had softened considerably, even hinting that some of the earlier terms could be renegotiated. Holding the phone, my emotions were tangled beyond words. When I returned home from work, Vincent was sitting in the living room, clearly waiting for me. My heart skipped a beat. Had he noticed I was taking advantage of his inner voice and soft-heartedness? He lifted his gaze to look at me, his eyes still devoid of warmth, but his next words left me stunned. "The project in the East District is going for rebidding next Wednesday." His tone was indifferent, as if stating something unrelated to himself. That proposal you submitted earlier is garbage. My heart sank, just as I'd feared. There's a folder on my study desk's computer. The password is your birthday. He stood up, ready to return to his room. As he passed by me, his steps hesitated slightly. He turned his head and gave me a glance, a deep, inscrutable look that carried an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Take it to use," he said, "and don't say I took yours again." Having said that, he didn't linger any longer and went straight back to his room. I stood rooted to the spot, feeling as if something had struck my heart hard, leaving it numb and aching. He knows. He knows I've been in his study, that I've seen what's on his computer. He didn't confront me, didn't get angry, even gave me the very thing he'd spent countless sleepless nights preparing, just like that. The password was my birthday. I rushed into the study, turned on the computer, typed in my birthdate, and the folder clicked open. Inside wasn't just that flawless Avery edition proposal, but also all the related market analysis, competitor evaluations, and even his simulated negotiation dialogues. Meticulous and thorough, poured from the heart. Staring at the dense text and data on the screen, my vision blurred. Vincent. I was a complete and utter fool. At the bidding conference for the East District project, I brought Vincent's meticulously prepared proposal and won without a shred of doubt. Standing on stage, surveying the varied expressions in the crowd, my gaze involuntarily drifted toward the corner. Vincent was indeed there. Dressed in a dark gray suit, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed as if he'd just happened by. When he noticed me looking, he averted his gaze almost instantly, lowering his head to fiddle with his phone, the picture of perfect indifference. But I could clearly hear his barely suppressed, slightly smug inner voice, "TSK, at least she's not completely stupid." The presentation was passable. But standing on stage like that, she actually looked quite the part. I stood under the spotlight, holding the letter of intent symbolizing victory, watching that two-faced man in the corner. Suddenly, all the grievances, resentment, doubts, and hurts from before were replaced at this moment by a fiercer, more steadfast emotion. I had to tell him. Tell him I knew. Tell him I was sorry. Tell him I think I've really fallen for him. Not just a little, a lot. The bidding session ended, and the crowd gradually dispersed. Pushing past those still congratulating me, I quickened my pace toward that corner. Vincent seemed to sense my intention. He pocketed his phone and turned to leave. "Vincent." I called out to him, slightly out of breath from running. He stopped but didn't turn around. I walked up to him, tilting my head back to meet his gaze. His brows were slightly furrowed, his eyes holding their usual impatience mixed with a barely perceptible hint of nervousness. "What is it?" His tone was icy. A few lingering bystanders were casting curious glances our way. I took a deep breath. To hell with it. "I've reviewed that proposal," I said, meeting his gaze word by word. Vincent's expression remained unchanged, save for the slightest twitch of his brow. "And?" "Thank you," I said earnestly. He scoffed as if hearing some ridiculous joke. "Thank me for what? For stealing your project and giving it back? Avery, when did you become such a hypocrite? What exactly does she want to say? Just a thank you?" My heart is beating a bit too fast. Hearing the flustered voice in his mind while seeing his outwardly forced composure, I suddenly mustered the courage to take a step forward, closing the distance between us. He instinctively retreated half a step, his back hitting the cold wall, a flicker of astonishment flashing through his eyes. "Vincent," I said, gazing at his face so close to mine, clearly seeing his slightly trembling eyelashes and the hint of panic in his eyes that he hadn't had time to hide. The voice was soft, yet carried an undeniable firmness. "I know it was me who pulled you out of the pond when you were 10. Vincent's pupils contracted sharply, his body instantly stiffening. "I also know that you remember. You've always remembered," I continued, my gaze locked onto him. "And I know even more, that you helped me not because you feared I'd drag you down, nor because of some damn business marriage arrangement." His Adam's apple bobbed violently, his lips pressed into a bloodless line. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, no sound came out. Those peach blossom eyes that always carried mockery or indifference now resembled a lake surface disturbed by a thrown pebble, rippling with complex emotions, shock, bewilderment, and a trace of embarrassment at being seen through. Vincent, I looked at him, finally voicing the words that had lingered in my heart for so long. My voice carried a barely perceptible tremor, yet it was exceptionally clear. I'm sorry, I was too foolish to recognize you until now. And also. I paused, feeling my cheeks burn, but forced myself to maintain eye contact. I think I've fallen for you. Not because you helped me, nor out of guilt. Just fallen for you, this stubborn, soft-hearted, awkward rival of mine. Time seemed to stand still at that moment. All the clamor around us faded away, leaving only him and me in this quiet corner, close enough to hear each other's breaths. Vincent froze completely. He stared at me, his eyes filled with disbelief and a nearly overflowing, ecstatic glow. The hard, icy shell that had encased him for years finally showed distinct cracks at this moment. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came out. And then, I heard it. The most genuine, scalding confession, turbulent as a tsunami, that had surged uncontrollably from the depths of his heart. She knows everything. She said, she likes me? Is it true? Am I not dreaming? Fuck. That word fuck was like a stone thrown into a still lake, rippling wave after wave of chaos in my mind. Not through his inner voice, but through his almost cracking, incredibly hoarse tone, spilling real and raw from his lips. He froze completely, his back pressed against the cold wall. Those peach blossom eyes, usually brimming with mockery or calculation, were now wide open, clearly reflecting my own nervous yet expectant face. Shock, wild joy, bewilderment, helplessness. A tumult of emotions like an overturned pallet churned violently in his eyes, colliding and swirling. His mouth parted, his Adam's apple bobbing several times before he finally found his voice, fragile, trembling as if on the verge of shattering. You. What did you just say? This time I didn't hear any inner thoughts. Perhaps because the storm inside him was too fierce, too overwhelming to form coherent thoughts. Or perhaps all his defenses crumbled before my confession of I like you, leaving him powerless to maintain them. Seeing him in such complete disarray, all my previous tension and anxiety suddenly dissipated, replaced by a bittersweet tenderness that nearly melted my heart. I took another step forward, almost pressing against him, and tilted my head up to meet his frantic gaze without flinching. Slowly and clearly, I repeated, I said, Vincent, I like you. Did you hear me? His breathing grew abruptly heavier, his chest rising and falling sharply. In his tightly fixed gaze, a nearly scorching light erupted, like a long-dormant volcano finally reaching its moment of eruption. You. His voice was hoarse, filled with cautious, almost disbelieving inquiry. How could you? When did you? I knew what he wanted to ask. He wanted to know how I had learned all this, wanted to know when I had started liking him. But now wasn't the best time to explain the bizarre ability of mind reading. Moreover, I didn't want this to define the beginning of our relationship. I reached out and gently grasped his hand, which hung stiffly at his side, trembling slightly. His fingers were long and slender, his knuckles prominent, now icy cold to the touch. Does it matter? I grasped his hand, trying to convey some warmth through my touch, and said softly while looking into his eyes. What matters is that I know now. I know you're a hypocritical bastard, I know you've secretly liked me for years, I know all the things you've done for me behind my back. Vincent, aren't you going to say something? The hand I held suddenly trembled violently, then immediately turned the tables by gripping mine forcefully, almost fiercely. The strength was so great it even caused me some pain. But in his eyes, that last trace of uncertainty and panic completely dissipated through this tight grip, replaced by a profound, scorching and unwavering affection that had settled deep within him. His other hand rose, with a barely perceptible tremor, and gently cupped my cheek. The warmth of his fingertips seeped through my skin, scalding in its intensity. Avery. He whispered my name, each syllable wrenched from the depths of his chest, heavy with the weight of years and rough with emotion. "You're such an idiot." I frowned, about to retort, but then he leaned down until his forehead rested against mine, our noses almost touching, our breaths mingling in the warm space between us. "I've waited for these words." He closed his eyes briefly, and when they opened again, they held nothing but an overwhelming tenderness, almost reverent in its depth, for what feels like a lifetime. The moment his words fell, he hesitated no longer, bending down to capture my lips with unerring precision. This was no gentle, tentative kiss. It carried instead a nearly destructive intensity, a yearning repressed far too long now unleashed. Dominant, imperious, refusing refusal. As if he meant to devour me whole, to merge my very being into his flesh and blood. My mind went blank, every sense overwhelmed by this sudden assault. His lips carried a faint coolness while his breath burned feverish against me, that distinctive cedarwood scent mingling with faint tobacco as he ruthlessly breached my defenses, conquering territory after territory. I could feel his trembling hands cradling my face, could feel his fingers whitening from their desperate grip on me. I could feel everything contained in this kiss, years of restraint, the bittersweet ache of unrequited love, the grievance of being misunderstood, and now the immense joy of having what was lost returned. Clumsy yet utterly sincere. Rough yet carrying the carefulness of treasuring something precious. My initial stiffness gradually melted away in his nearly desperate passion. Closing my eyes, I began responding awkwardly. My hands unconsciously reached for his shoulders, clutching the crisp fabric of his suit. Feeling my response, his body tensed momentarily before the kiss deepened into something more lingering and tender, filled with a satisfaction that bordered on choking back tears. In the dimly lit corner, faint voices seemed to drift from afar, but everything grew hazy and distant. In this world, it felt as though only the two of us remained, along with this long overdue kiss that confirmed everything between us. How long it lasted, I couldn't tell, only when we were both breathless did he slowly pull away, though his forehead still pressed against mine, his breathing ragged and hot against my flushed cheeks. Neither of us spoke, simply gazing into each other's eyes at such close range, calming our racing hearts and uneven breaths. His eyes were like a sky full of stars, dazzlingly bright, reflecting clearly my own flushed face and slightly swollen lips. Then, I heard his inner voice, the one that had disappeared for a moment, resound again with a relieved, almost choked-up softness. "It's real, not a dream. Avery is mine." I looked at him and couldn't help but laugh, though my eyes grew warm. "Vincent," I whispered, my voice still slightly hoarse from the kiss, "can you stop calling me an idiot in your head from now on?" Vincent's body stiffened abruptly, his pupils dilating instantly as if he'd heard something utterly horrifying. His hands, which had been cupping my face, trembled slightly as he stared at me in disbelief. You can hear?" Looking at his thunderstruck expression, I finally couldn't hold back and burst out laughing, with a hint of mischievous triumph. "What else?" I raised an eyebrow. "How do you think I discovered you're this thunderous secret admirer?" Vincent's face visibly flushed a light pink at breakneck speed, spreading all the way to the tips of his ears. His expression, a mix of shock, embarrassment, and the despair of "my image is ruined," was truly a sight to behold. Since when?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Probably." I deliberately drew out my words, enjoying his nervous expression. "Starting from the engagement party night when you got drunk and collapsed on my bed?" It seemed he instantly recalled all those shameful thoughts from that night. His entire face turned completely red, even his neck flushing crimson. He abruptly released me, took a step back, and covered his face with his hands, letting out a weak, nearly broken groan. "Fuck." This time, it was a real curse filled with shame and fury. Watching him look like he wanted to disappear into the ground, I only laughed even more heartily. So this is what Vincent is like when he sheds all pretense and shows his true self, utterly adorable. The atmosphere became incredibly on our way back to the villa. Vincent was driving while I sat in the passenger seat. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his expression solemn, but the tips of his ears remained tinged with a faint, lingering blush. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned slightly white. Meanwhile, I was in an excellent mood, the corners of my lips curled in an irrepressible smile. From time to time, I'd glance sideways at him, enjoying the flustered tension beneath his feigned composure. So, I deliberately drawled out the word, breaking the silence in the car, "Her hand is so soft, just like when she saved me at 10, A faint screech, the sound of tires lightly scraping against the ground. Vincent abruptly slammed on the brakes, then quickly released them, causing the car to jolt slightly. He took a deep breath, practically grinding his teeth as he said, "Avery, shut up. Time to silence the witness. Should I jump out of the car now? How much did she actually hear?" His internal monologue was flooding with panic again. I suppressed my laughter so hard my shoulders trembled. And also, when will this idiot finally recognize me? I continued reading aloud at a leisurely pace. Stupid Avery, utterly clueless? Vincent's profile was tightly drawn, his jawline appearing particularly pronounced from clenching his teeth. He abruptly turned the steering wheel, pulling the car to the side of the road before turning to glare at me with a ferocious intensity. "Avery!" He practically spat my name through gritted teeth. I met his gaze fearlessly, even tilting my chin up in challenge. "What? You dare think it but not own up to it?" He stared at me, his chest rising and falling several times. Those peach blossom eyes churned with a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and a hint of resigned indulgence. Suddenly, he leaned in, his arm resting on the back of my seat, enclosing me within his presence. His eyes narrowed dangerously as he said, "Yeah, I thought about it, so what? Not only did I think about it, but I also..." Before he could finish, he kissed me again. Unlike the previous kiss in the corner, which was filled with venting and confirmation, this one carried a clear tone of punishment and aggression, deeper, more lingering, and far more skilled. Dizzy from his kiss, I finally managed to gasp when he released me, breathlessly accusing, You ambushed me." Vincent looked at my glistening lips and dazed expression, a hint of triumphant amusement flashing in his eyes. His earlier embarrassment seemed to have faded considerably. He reached out, brushing his thumb lightly across the corner of my lips, his touch carrying an unprecedented intimacy and possessiveness. From now on, his voice was husky, leaving no room for argument, "You're only allowed to hear the good stuff." My heart skipped a beat, but my mouth refused to surrender. "That depends on your performance." He chuckled softly, settling back into the driver's seat and starting the car. His ears remained flushed, but his expression had relaxed considerably, even carrying a trace of unmistakable delight. "Forget it. So what if she finds out? Anyway, she's mine now." Hearing his thoughts that sounded almost resigned yet tinged with a hint of smugness, I turned to look at the night scenery rapidly receding outside the window. The curve of my lips grew wider and wider, completely beyond my control. On the window glass, my smiling face was faintly reflected, along with the man beside me, who still pretended to be composed, but whose frosty demeanor had melted away, replaced by a spring-like warmth in his eyes. A sworn enemy turned lover? This feeling seems not bad at all. No, it's actually pretty great.